Ms. Maxfield, can you repeat the question?
Yes. Ms. Brown, I want to talk to, what I'd like the jury to understand is kind of your before and after observations. And I think you said that before, that she seemed alert, on it, problem solving. Um, Is it also true that she has kind of a hostess quality, or she,
Absolutely, yes.
and that's consistent, that's been consistent over the decades that you've known her?
Absolutely, yeah.
And in August of 2018, you said that you'd noticed a change.
Correct.
And just kind of in a regular way, can you describe what you saw?
Yeah, she had trouble focusing. She had trouble making decisions, sometimes minor decisions like, what are we going to have for dinner? There was, I'm trying to find the right words, I'm sorry. There was a sense that even though we were in the room together, that that she was easily distracted, let me put it that way. She wasn't necessarily in the room with me. I don't know how to say that.
Okay. No, I think we get a feel for that.
Yeah, there was a numbness, kind of, yeah.
And I think the before Nancy that you described was someone who it would be very, very unusual for her not to be engaged if she was in a social situation with you.
Exactly, yeah. So that's why when there were times when there wasn't much engagement, that seemed very unusual to me.
And in the past, when you had spent time with Nancy, was she someone who wore her emotions on her sleeve or on the surface?
Not at all.
And what did you see in August of 2018?
Her emotions were just below the surface. She fought back tears a number of times. There were, I think, a couple of times that we teared up together. So, yeah, I think one of the reasons we get along well is because we're alike in a lot of those ways. And so, yeah, I try to keep mine in check too. She's better at it than I am, though.
There's been testimony in this case that Ms. Brophy didn't display what some people thought was appropriate grief. Was that what you experienced when you were there in August of 2018?
I don't know what appropriate grief is. I want to be careful here.
Be careful here.
Yeah.
I want you to have your cousin hat on.
Okay. I think given what she went through and given what we were going through, because Dan was not the only death in the family. And so we had three other deaths before the end of the year. And so that was significant, and I don't know how you can grieve correctly. I know how you can grieve incorrectly. I don't know what correct is.
Did you see anything that suggested to you that she wasn't grieving?
No, not at all. I mean, there were, like I said, there were tears, and we had some conversation about difficulty making plans and trying to figure out how to move forward.
You described on direct examination that Ms. Brophy has, that humor is an important part of how she interacts socially.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Had that tendency toward humor been suppressed?
Very much so, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and when we tend to get a little sarcastic.
Oh, you and Nancy?
Yeah, and there was a little more sarcasm going on, but yeah, not that there's like a light humor, and that wasn't there.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if you testified to this, but I'll ask you your opinion. Did you think that Nancy and Mark were close, her brother?
Yeah, in many ways, yes. Right. It wasn't something that we talked about.
What about after he died? Did she express her feelings towards Mark dying?
No, we didn't talk about it. And let me back up and say that now that I think about it, I wasn't expecting that question. That, yeah, they were close. She's the one that told me that Mark was diagnosed, and she told me some personal thoughts on his passing. Yeah.
Like what?
That like that he had really gotten tired of going through chemo. That was that's a huge, it's a huge life adjustment, and I don't think he wanted to go through it again. I don't think that that's something that you just kind of pop off to somebody you don't trust.
Sure. Meaning he wouldn't have shared that.
He
with
wouldn't
her
have
if
shared that with Nancy if they weren't close.
And did Nancy, we talked about, or sorry, Ms. Maxfield asked you about grieving. I'm not going to ask you about appropriateness of grieving, 'cause I understand what you're saying there, but did she seem to be grieving over Mark's death?
Yes. Yeah.
And then was there another death in the family that summer? I know there was one later, but.
Yeah, our favorite Uncle Ed.
Oh,
He was like the Mr. Rogers of the family. And we actually had been through a number of deaths because Nancy's mother died. And then a couple of years later, both of our aunt and uncle died very short time apart. And that was the other sister. And then Ed passed away.
when did Ed pass?
Ed passed in August of, it was in 2018. It was in that time frame.
Sure.
I don't have this, I mean, I could Google it and tell you.
No, but I mean, in just generally, I'm not.
Yeah,
trying
it
to
was
hold
in
you to
it was shortly, I don't know if it was before or after Nancy was arrested, but I think it was before, because she was out, because Mark's memorial service was around the same time as Ed was dying. And so, and I was driving down to Austin fairly regularly to take my mom to see her brother because that was her, her closest sibling.
Sure. And did Nancy express grief towards the loss of Ed as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't mean to pile on. It sounds like the family.
That's
had a rough
exactly what I call it, piling
yeah,
on.
It sounds like it. But was there anybody else that passed away during that summer
Besides Dan and
besides Dan, Mark, and Ed?
in the family?
Yeah.
No, I'm not remembering anybody in the summer. She had a niece who passed away later that year.
Right. But that was after Nancy had been arrested.
Correct.
Okay. But before, did Nancy ever talk about any close friends or anything like that passing that summer as well?
She didn't mention that to me.
Okay, and you weren't aware of any?
Mm-mm.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood the timeline. So you said you were up here for a conference in 2018.
Yeah, training.
Was that before Dan died?
No,
Oh, okay.
I was actually in another training for trauma the day Dan died.
I see.
So
And did Nancy call you and tell you?
that he passed?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. How did you find out?
I saw her message on Facebook that she wanted some privacy.
Okay. When she posted the message the next day?
Mm-hmm.
And so you didn't speak with her that day, though?
No, she had asked for privacy and I was in the training, so I waited a few days and then I called her.
I gotcha.
I had decided at that training that I was going to come to Portland for the next training. Normally you do the whole training with your cohort through the whole, it's a 3-year training. And so normally you stay with your cohort through the whole training, but I had a nephew getting married on the same weekend as Intermediate 2 in Texas. So I chose to come here for Intermediate 2. in Portland.
So when did you get to Portland? Do you remember?
August 8th at 6:55 p.m.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought these were two separate trips. The training that you came to in,
The one that I was in June was in the Metroplex. It
okay.
was in Denton.
And so you didn't come to Portland until August.
Correct.
That's when your training was.
Yeah.
Okay. I apologize. I thought these were two separate trips.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you came up,
August 8th, and I left on August the 14th, I think.
so when was the last time you had seen Nancy in person before that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know I saw her in 2010 when Barbara passed.
Okay. Her mother.
Yeah.
So you think the last time you saw Nancy in person before August of 2018 was 2010 maybe?
It's possible. Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about Nancy's baseline and
Mm-hmm.
kind of who she was. Would you necessarily know if that changed leading up to Dan's death?
I would have had a pretty good idea. Nancy and I had communication in 2017.
Okay.
And that was very much on point with who she is and the kind of communication that we normally have.
Okay. Did you talk to her much in 2018?
Quite a bit, yeah.
Before Dan's death?
No,
Okay. So
I think maybe we had some emails go back and forth, but not much.
okay, so from, let's just say January 1st, 2018, just for ease of dates, so we don't
Mm-hmm.
talk over each other. January 1st, 2018 to June 2nd, 2018. You think you maybe exchanged some emails with her?
It's possible.
Yeah. Do you recall any specific conversations that you had with her?
No, but I'll also say that my youngest brother was having a quintuple bypass in that time frame, so I wasn't.
You had a lot going on.
Oh, you know what? I know I did have an email. We did have an email exchange in, I want to say May, because Nancy had sent a contribution to, my brother has a nonprofit, and she sent a contribution to the nonprofit, and I was thanking her for doing that because Joe wasn't able to participate because he had had the surgery.
I see. Okay. So you said you'd have a pretty good idea for baseline change, but you didn't really talk with her in 2018, it sounds like. So maybe you wouldn't have had such an opportunity to evaluate that. Is that right?
I disagree because I'm not basing my assessment of what she was like in 2017, but you know, from the 40 years, 50 years I've known her. I mean, even, you know, we talked about the family reunion in 83, and that's when we kind of started to become, or in the early 80s, that's when we started to spend more time together. But we had been to family reunions before that when I was younger. But that was when we really kind of connected.
Okay. But you're basing your opinion on her baseline continuing on the fact that you last really spoke with her in 2017.
No, I'm basing it on the fact that I'm basing it on 40 years of experience.
Maybe I'm not asking the right question. If something changed with Nancy in early 2018, you wouldn't have known about it because you didn't talk to her.
That's a possibility. However, we did have that email exchange in May, and that email exchange was very much in line with her normal baseline.
You can tell somebody's baseline through an email?
I can. Well, I know Nancy well enough to know that the tone and it was more in line with the 40 years that we have been communicating than what I experienced in September.
How many emails was this?
In May, probably 2 or 3.
2 or 3 emails, and you can determine somebody's baseline from that.
I could determine that she was more or less like I have normally experienced her. You know, I just like, you know, we've been communicating for the last 3 years. I can tell what mood more or less she's in when she writes me by the way she writes.
The subject was about donations.
That was the initial subject, but then we got into, so what else is going on in your world and how's everybody and that kind of stuff.
2 or 3 emails.
Yeah, well, I didn't say they were short emails. We write a lot. Yeah, I have a big family.
Yeah.
So, I have 4 siblings, so, and then they have 11 children. So it takes a while to get through all that.
Did Nancy share a lot with you when you guys would talk on the phone?
She shared quite a bit. I mean, we always keep some stuff in reserve.
Did she talk about a relationship with Dan?
No, no. And no. I mean, it never beyond, like the email in, I can't remember if it was the one in late 2017 or the one in 2018. I think it was 2017. We were talking about traveling together, and she said that Dan was still wanting to work, and that she would come out and visit without him if he didn't want to come.
That was in 2017.
Yeah.
And did she talk about her plans for retirement, things like that?
Yeah. Yeah, we both have gone back and forth about our plans for retirement.
Okay, what version did you hear?
About her plans for retirement? That she was thinking about, and that they were thinking about moving to somewhere in Europe, and that they would live someplace. The places that we talked about were Portugal and Ireland, and that they would travel, and that it would be more affordable to travel from, if you had a base in Europe, than to try to fly back and forth.
Did she say when they planned on doing that?
She didn't have a time frame.
Was this more like in generalities, like this is something they would like to do type of thing in the future?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did she say that those plans changed?
She didn't say, not until after Dan died.
Sure. But not leading up to that?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Did she talk about, well, did you ever talk to Dan?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, but not like, because, it was normally like email or cell phone. So it wasn't like, back in the day when you called somebody on the landline and you don't know who answers. So the times I talked to him were at the family reunions.
And in speaking with Nancy, you said that she thought that Dan had intended to keep working.
Yeah. We talked about that retirement is kind of taboo in the family.
Yeah.
And, Barbara worked until she was almost 80 years old, maybe older. And Nancy had said that retirement was hard for her, and I'm finding it hard for me too, and that it was the curse of the Cook family genes. And I responded to her that I thought it was on the McNally side, which is my maiden name, and that I was in deep doo-doo because I got it on both sides.
And it sounds like maybe Dan did too. Did she talk about Jack working into his 80s, Dan's father?
No, she didn't.
Oh, she didn't talk about it? Okay.
No.
But Dan didn't have any plans for retirement?
She didn't say anything about Dan's plans. We didn't talk about it in those terms. She talked about it in terms of these were things that she and Dan were considering.
Right. And when you came up here in August, did Nancy, when you guys would have discussions, well, first of all, how long were you here?
I came in on August 8th and I left on the 14th, so it was almost an entire week.
About a week. Did Nancy ever talk about where she was on the morning that Dan had died?
She said that she was in bed, that she was, she was in bed, and that she had gotten a call from somebody, or she was at home anyway, that she had gotten a call from somebody.
Okay. And this is in August that she's telling you this?
Correct.
Okay, so sometime between August, I'm sorry, what were the dates again? 8th and 14th?
8th and 14th, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So early to mid-August, she's disclosing to you that that morning she was at home in bed and she got a call.
Yeah.
Did she tell you what that person had told her?
That something had happened at the school. but that was about all that she knew.
Okay. And what did she say she did with that information?
She tried to call Dan and he didn't answer. So then she called Dan's mother and asked Dan's mother to call. And then Dan's mother was going to call, and Nancy was going to go to the school to see what she could find out.
And did she say whether she did that or not?
She said she did go.
Did she tell you what happened once she got there?
She said that everybody was kind of lined up, and she noticed that there were some of the students there and some of the instructors, but she didn't see Dan.
Did she tell you what she was thinking at that point?
No, she didn't tell me what she was thinking.
Did she tell you what she did after she arrived?
She said that a lot of people came up to her and gave her hugs, and then that she was interviewed by the police, and that she didn't have a lot of recollection as to what happened.
Didn't remember what she talked about, you mean?
That was all she said. I didn't push it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. I'm focusing on less about what happened and more concerned with how she is functioning in that moment and how she will heal and get through it.
Yeah. So she said she was interviewed by the police.
Mm-hmm.
And did she recall anything that she had, or did she, relay anything to you about what that entailed?
No.
Okay. And did she talk about after the interview what happened, where she went?
No.
Did she talk about how she went back home after that?
No.
Okay. Did she tell you that when she went back home after being interviewed that she gave the police a firearm?
No.
Did you know that she owned a firearm?
She told me she owned a firearm. She told me she gave it to them, but she didn't say it was like when I went back home. She didn't give me timelines, but she told me that the zip tie was still on it from when they purchased it.
She mentioned that to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying she didn't mention to you that you literally gave the gun to them within an hour after being interviewed?
She did not tell me that, no.
Did she tell you about the other guns that she owns?
No.
When she told you about the gun she gave the detectives, did she say why? Did she explain why she was telling you that? What was the context of the conversation, I guess? Why she's telling you that she gave the gun to detectives?
I can't recall specifically. It may have just been part of the conversation, but I wasn't peppering her with questions. I wasn't asking her questions. I was allowing her to tell me what she was comfortable telling me in the time that she wanted to tell me.
So you weren't asking her about guns, she offered the gun.
Yeah. I wasn't asking her about anything about it because that's not the way I operate.
Sure. You're a listener.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I prefer healing,
Yeah,
not re-traumatizing.
sure. Makes sense. Did she, it sounds like she offered a couple of things about this firearm, that it had a zip tie on it still.
Mm-hmm.
Did she mention anything else about the firearm that you recall?
No, I have absolutely zilch interest in guns, so I would be the last person she would like to have this conversation with.
But nonetheless, she made sure to mention it to you.
I don't know. She mentioned it. I don't know that she made sure to mention it.
Okay, fair enough. She mentioned it.
Yeah.
Okay.
By then, I think there was plenty of stuff in the papers too. So
Had you read that?
I'd read some of it, but I hadn't read, I don't know when all that started, but
Right.
yeah. And obviously there was stuff in the paper the day he was killed.
Right. Did she talk to you about a gun that she'd purchased previously, a ghost gun build kit?
No. The only thing she mentioned was that she had that one gun, that it had a zip tie, and she gave it to the police.
So she didn't tell you that she actually still had the ghost gun build kit when you were talking to her in August?
No.
Did she talk to you about how she purchased a sliding barrel off of eBay?
She didn't talk to me about guns at all, other than what I told you.
Just the one. Okay. Did she happen to mention, not specifically just about the gun, but did she happen to mention that the gun that she owned was the exact make and model and caliber of the firearm that killed Dan?
I still don't know any of that. And, you know, I don't know how to tell you.
That's
All
okay.
she said was gun, zip tie,
Yeah.
gave it to the police. You know, I'm the kind of person that I can say, there's a little gun, there's a big gun. A big gun, I don't want them.
Right.
You know, I don't want to be on the receiving end. I don't know how to fire one.
You don't have any interest.
I'm the Texan that doesn't have a gun.
The one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so when you're there in August, did Nancy talk to you about her financial situation at the time?
A little bit.
Yeah. Did she share with you that she was having trouble getting life insurance to pay out?
No.
When you say she shared some financial information, was she telling you that she was hurting for money?
No. She told me that she was selling the house, that the market was hot, that they had developed, you know, they'd gotten quite a bit of equity in the house. And that was also part of their retirement plan. She showed me, we walked every day because we had to walk the dogs. And she showed me some of the other houses near there where they had taken one piece of property and divided it up and made multiple houses on that property. And it was, you know, for those people, quite lucrative.
I mean, did she say that's what she was going to do?
That was, well, I think she was intending to sell it to somebody who would do that.
Oh, not that she was going to do it, but
No.
sell it to somebody who might want to do that.
Correct. Yeah.
Did she say who she was going to sell it to?
No,
Okay. Did she talk about a neighbor being interested in buying it?
I don't recall that.
So she wasn't talking to you about concerns with money. She didn't ask to borrow money or anything like that to get
No, no. But if she had, I would have loaned it to her.
Sure.
Actually, I probably would have given it to her.
Sounds like quite a few people might have helped them out. All right. Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Redirect?
No. Can this witness be excused, Your Honor?
Certainly.
Can I sit?
Yes. All right, so you can be excused.
I made the
and-
witness sit in the courtroom now,
Yeah,
Your Honor.
sure.
Thank you.
If both sides are excusing her.
Yes, sir.
Then who is defense's next witness?
Rita Hood, Your Honor, who we have to get on the WebEx.
Oh, okay. Oh, it sounds like she's going to be up in just a minute. And I'm sorry, what was that name again?
Rita Hood.
Rita Hood, okay.
Hood.
All right.
Good afternoon, Ms. Hood. This is the court clerk. Are you able to hear me?
Uh-oh.
I believe you are muted, Ms. Hood.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and then can I have you just say, oh, perfect, you've pulled up on the screen as our speaker. So I'll go ahead and have you please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. You can put your hand down. And then because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
My name is Rita Hood, Ritahood.
All right, whenever defense is ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Hood. I'm Lisa Maxwell. I think you and I
Hello.
have spoken electronically, but not face to face. I'm here with Nancy Brophy, and I have a couple of questions for you. Do you know Nancy Brophy?
Yes, I do.
And how long have you known her?
50 plus years, I think now.
Where did you meet her?
We met at the University of Houston, both as transfer students. We were in the same dorm together, living across the hall from each other.
Were you two very good college friends?
Ultimately, yes, we were.
Would it be fair to say that when you and Nancy were in college together, that your politics were both, we didn't call it progressive then, sort of leftist?
Well, I wouldn't call it leftist, but we shared some very strong ideas together, yes.
Okay. And what kinds of things did you do together? What kinds of projects did you work on together in college?
Well, our first projects were playing bridge. That was for the first year we were friends in the dorm. But then the second year that I was there and that we were roommates, we worked on quite a few efforts relative to Planned Parenthood, getting a birth control clinic at the University Student Health Center.
Was that a time when birth control was illegal for women?
Well, I'm not sure that birth control was illegal, but it was something that had just become much more common.
Okay. Did you graduate ahead of Nancy Brophy?
I did.
And after graduation, did the two of you remain friends?
Yes, we did. I left Texas and moved back closer to my family in Colorado.
After you left college, did you and Nancy Brophy see each other?
Yes, we did.
At some point, did she come to live in Colorado?
Yes, she did.
You remember what year that was?
1987, I believe.
While she was living, do you know how long she lived there in Colorado with you?
I believe it was a couple of years, maybe.
All right.
At least.
Okay. And do you know where she went after she left Denver?
Yes, she moved to Portland.
After Nancy Brophy moved to Portland, did the two of you continue your friendship?
Yes, we did.
And did she visit you in Denver after that?
No, I don't think she's ever been back. Well, yes, she has. No, I take that back. In 2015, we had a college roommates reunion, and she came to Denver for that.
Did you have work that brought you to Portland from time to time?
Yes, I did.
And when you came to Portland, did you stay with the Brophies?
Yes, I think so, a couple of times.
Okay. And did you when you came to Portland, did you get to meet Dan Brophy?
I absolutely did.
What was your first impression of Dan Brophy?
I thought he was an amazing partner for Nancy, that he seemed to just go with the flow with her and her enthusiasm for any project that came her way. And he was very encouraging and very much in favor of her doing what she wanted to do.
Did you get a strong sense of how Nancy viewed Dan Brophy?
Yes, I mean, he was part of the plan. He was always included whenever we were together. She spoke with, talked to him all the time, and when he wasn't there, and he was part of he was the family.
Over the years that you've known Nancy, did you get, did you see enough to form an opinion regarding how she handles stress?
How he handled or she handled?
How she handled, sorry, this mask is kind of hard to work through.
Right. Nancy always managed stress amazingly well, as far as I could see. She was very calm in stressful situations and just wanted to solve a problem. Solve whatever the situation was, she wanted to make it better.
On the pessimism to optimism scale, where would you put Nancy?
Optimist.
High optimist on the scale, or?
Yes, definitely. Always tried to see the good in every situation.
Were there times, for example, like when you were going through a divorce, that you confided in Nancy about personal things?
Of course.
And did she confide in you about personal things?
I think to some extent, yes. Mostly that her confidences were about her family members. That seemed to be the most what she most confided in me about.
Over the time that you've known Nancy and that she was with Dan Brophy, did you ever notice a change in how she talked about him, or your sense of how strong that marriage was?
No, I never saw any change. It was the times that we were together, it was always Dan was front and center and the center of the universe, and everything else, I never saw a change.
Okay. Did you have occasion to talk with Nancy after Dan died?
Yes.
And can you just generally describe the demeanor that you observed after Dan's death?
She was unquestionably grief-stricken, in shock, overwhelmed, confused, completely in disbelief that what had happened.
After Dan died, did Nancy continue to talk about Dan in the present tense?
Yes, she did. She would say, well, Dan and I always, or Dan said, and we talked about that. He was very much present.
Is there anything else you want me to ask her? I don't think I have any other questions, but there could be more from the other side, okay? So don't hang up.
All right.
Okay.
Cross-examination?
Switching microphones. Good afternoon, Ms. Hood. You
Good
mentioned
afternoon.
that you talked to Nancy Brophy about your divorce. When was that?
In the mid-90s.
Okay. And was that a amicable situation, or did you talk to her quite a bit about it?
Oh, I can't really remember. We were both working a lot and traveling, and so I'm sure we discussed it whenever we would have a chance to talk on the phone.
Okay. And can you just sort of clarify, when was the last time you saw Nancy in person?
2015.
Okay. So any communication you had with her since 2015 was either phone or email or letters or something like that?
Facebook, yes.
Okay. What was the main mechanism that you talked to her through? Would it be phone calls or Facebook?
I would say phone calls were the main one.
Okay. And how regularly would you say you talked to her?
Not regularly, no. Spontaneously, out of the blue. One would call the other. We were both very busy people in that time period.
All right. Thank you very much. That's all the questions I have.
No, thank you, Ms. Hood.
All right, Ms. Hood, thank you. You can go ahead and disconnect.
All right, I will.
Looks like, there we go. All right, and who is the defense next witness? Sure, go ahead. Okay. All right, Ms. Dennehy, we'll have you come up here and just step on into this witness box. And if you can stay standing for just a moment, but get close to the microphone, my clerk will give you an oath.
Thank you. I'll have you raise your right hand, please. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, then you may be seated, and you may remove your mask.
Ms. Dennehy is deaf, and I'm wondering if I can remove my mask while we talk.
You can.
And then, Ms. Dennehy, because we're being recorded, could I ask you to please state and spell both your first and last name?
Yep. Lydia Dennehy, LYDIA, DENNEHY.
Ms. Dennehy, would it be helpful for you to have, I have one of these little ear things, although I'm not very good at getting it in and out. Would it be helpful for you to have one of these or no?
Depends on whether it works with my hearing aids or not. I don't know.
So should we just try to do it this way? Would that work?
Um,
Or do you want to give it a go?
I might try this.
Okay.
Let me get you a different one. Sorry, Judge, this one seems to...
And while we're waiting, Ms. Dennehy, there is water there if you want any.
Okay, thank you.
Are those on?
No, they're
No,
not
they're
yet.
not plugged into anything.
Okay, let's wait.
I mean, I will say it sounds like Ms. Dennehy is hearing everything we're saying. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah.
Difficulty though?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll wait then.
If you were my husband, he would be saying, "Do you want me to guess what? Do you want to guess what I'm saying, or do you want me to just say
Okay,
it?" So-
all right. If we can get you a hearing device here.
All right.
Sorry, Judge, it's not.
That's all right. If we need to take a break, we can.
Yeah, can we just take a 1 second pause, Judge? I'm having difficulty with both of the devices that I have here as
Sure.
backups.
Do you want the jury to go back?
No, if we can just go off the record for a second.
All right, we're going to go off the record for just a moment and take.
Okay, are you able to hear that through the headset, Ms. Dennehy?
I'm not sure if I'm hearing. Okay, I'm hearing myself. So.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We'll go back on the record then, Judge. Thank you.
All right, we're back on the record, and Ms. Dennehy, if you do have difficulty hearing, just let us know, okay?
I will. Thank
All
you.
right, when you're ready, Ms. Maxfield.
Good afternoon, Ms. Dennehy. How are we doing? Is an echo or are we good?
This is good.
Perfect. Was there a time that you worked for Nancy Brophy?
Yes, I worked for her for about 9.5 years, and starting in December of 1995, and then through the birth of I was pretty pregnant with my son.
What's pretty pregnant?
I'm maybe 7 months. I can't remember exactly.
And did you work for her at her catering company?
I did.
Did you work with both her and Dan Brophy?
I did.
Was there a year when you worked for that catering company that Dan kind of worked there full time as well?
Because I worked part-time, my guess is he was there a lot, but yeah.
Okay.
It was never explicitly said to me that he was there full-time.
Can you describe just generally what you observed of the working relationship between Nancy Brophy and Dan Brophy?
I admired it as a equal partnership because that Dan was, you know, Nancy always said I went to culinary school too, so I could like fill in the gaps and then be the thing. But that Dan was the chef. He was like the lead person in the kitchen, and Nancy was the people person and the organizer and the manager of all of the all of us lowly staff members and stuff. Yeah.
Did you know whose company that was?
It was Nancy's company. Yeah.
Okay. And let me ask you this: did Dan Brophy treat Nancy Brophy like she was the boss, or how did that work?
Yes. I mean, yes. So she gave him the menus and yeah, but there was a lot of autonomy. Like I was the lead front of the house person, and so um, you know, the food would be prepared, and then I would take it to somebody's house, and I would be the person at the house dealing with whatever came up.
Can you describe Nancy Brophy as a boss? What kind of a boss was she?
I really enjoyed working for her. Because I went back for a teaching degree, and I wanted a part-time job that I could come and go and leave. And it worked out really well for me. I loved that she loved to laugh and that we laughed. And I liked variety and I liked working hard, and I was able to do that. And then I have, a little bit of ADD, and then I didn't grow up in like fancy dining and stuff. And so Nancy showed me how to like stack the teacups so that all of the handles went the same way, and things like that, because that's not something that my family, the paper plates went in the fire, right? So it's a little different. And then I am, she was generous with her time and with, for me in particular, she helped me, like we would drive places and we would talk about things. So she helped me. I think I had a friend who had a bunch of different problems, and she's like, well, sometimes you just have to let go of the drama and you just have to let them go and be themselves, and maybe you'll connect with them later or something. Or like when I was I got my teaching degree, and then I was substitute teaching and was like interviewing for jobs and never getting a job. And she knew one of the superintendents at a school district, and he said something to her about needing to hire somebody because somebody retired in December. So that was my first teaching job.
So you had worked for her off and on for 9 years, and then she helped you get your first teaching job?
I actually worked with her even after I got my teaching jobs, like because there's Christmas break or summer break or weekends and things like that.
And had you been to the Brophy home?
I did go. I went to their home together in Beaverton. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't like an apartment or whatever. I hadn't been to.
And you testified that you got to observe how they work together in an employment situation. Did you have opportunities just to view how they were together just as regular people or a regular married couple?
Yeah, not a ton, just because we, mostly I saw them at work, but like at their house, I remember Nancy saying, well, the front yard is mine, and that's why it's manicured and has rhododendrons that are like hedge. And the backyard is Dan's, and that's why there are chickens and compost piles and, kombucha growing in the basement or whatever. And that, to me, it was they sort of negotiated a partnership there, and I appreciated that as somebody in a newly married. And then and then they had a housewarming party, and so my husband and I came to that, and there was Nancy in the kitchen greeting everybody, and there was Dan out touring everybody in the backyard and through the gardens and chickens and stuff. So
I want to just ask you, was there an employee with the catering company, a guy who would kind of fat shame women or make jokes about women who he thought were
yeah, I don't know that because I'm hard of hearing, I don't catch everything, but I do remember him saying something about somebody he was dating or something, and Dan just saying, hey, some of us like women have a little extra to love or something, and that was the end of it. I was for me as a woman employee, I wasn't as well-rounded as I am now, but it just felt safe.
that he called that out?
Yeah, that he called it out.
In 2018, just before Dan died, did you and Nancy have a conversation?
I don't think so.
Remember her calling you and asking you for some advice about autism?
Oh, I'm not sure that I don't particularly remember that actually, because yeah, we, after my son's 17 now, so after I had him, I was busy doing that, and then I I work for, I'm a parent partner, so I help families with special health care needs navigate different systems. And so I don't remember that conversation, but
Okay.
it's very possible. Lots of people do.
But you generally are a resource for people who have autistic kids, or in
Yes.
Nancy's case, an autistic nephew.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember just generally having a conversation with her, maybe in the month before Dan died?
Um,
If you
Yeah.
don't, that's okay. I'm just,
yeah, not, yeah, I can't remember in particular, but I totally believe it because I do talk to a lot of people about it, autism.
okay. I don't think I have any other questions, but they might.
All right, any cross-examination?
No questions, thank you.
All right, may this witness be excused?
Yes,
And for the state?
Yes.
All right, you can step down.
thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we can share. It works for you.
All right, so who is the defense next witness?
We'll call John Lenz, Your Honor.
All right, and Ms. Maxfield, if you can just put your mask
Oh,
back
I
on.
forgot.
That's all
I'm
right.
sorry.
All right, Mr. Lenz, will have you come up and just take a, well, actually, if you could just step into the witness box, but stay standing for just a moment, and we'll give you an oath. And if you could get as close as possible to the microphone. Ms. Liu?
I'll have you please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, then you may be seated and you may remove your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
My first name is John, John, and my last name is Lenz, Lenz.
All right, and Mr. Lenz, there is water there if you want it. It looks like you do.
Thank you. I was hoping for that.
All right. After you've poured yourself some, then defense can start its questioning.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Inauspicious start.
So, Mr. Lenz, what do you do for a living?
I own an insurance agency, and I'm a financial planner.
All right. So are you licensed both as an insurance broker and also as a securities?
That's right. I'm also licensed in securities.
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about the licenses you hold and how long you've been doing this.
I've had my life insurance and health insurance license since 1981, so 41 years. And I've had my securities license most of that time as well.
You mentioned you're also a financial planner. Does that require a certification?
That's right. I'm a CFP, Certified Financial Planner.
How long have you been doing that?
I think about 20 years.
Are there other particular charters or certifications that you've earned over the years?
Yes, I've got 2 degrees from the American College, CLU, which stands for Chartered Life Underwriter, which is a degree that specializes in life insurance, and Chartered Financial Consultant, which is more life insurance with a little more outside the insurance industry financial experience and background.
Okay. So have you, over the course of your career, sort of migrated your focus?
Yes, most of my work is with life insurance and retirement income planning.
Right.
And how long has that been your primary focus?
Most of that 40 years.
All right. Do you also, this isn't the first time you've testified, I take it?
No, it is not.
Right. How many times do you think in all have you testified?
I've probably only testified in court a few times. I've consulted with a dozen or more attorneys in the state of Oregon, the FBI, different organizations on insurance matters during my career as an expert.
All right. Have you ever testified in a criminal case before?
Yes, one time.
All right. And do you typically work for one side or the other in the work that you do, or are you available to work with anybody
No, I
who calls you?
don't have a preference.
And tell us just a little bit more about some of the community work that you do or some of the professional associations that you participate in.
Oh, I've been in the Financial Planning Association on their board, and I'm part of many insurance companies, agents advisory group, where we sit and design insurance plans and consult with the insurance company executives on what would make a good policy for consumers.
Okay. So you now have been working, I take it, directly with consumers for most of the 40 years or so that you've been in practice?
Yes, from 1981 through about 1988, I was exclusively with consumers. And at that point, 1988, in May, I started a company called Lens Financial Group. And that company my job was mostly to work with insurance professionals, other people who had insurance licenses that were dealing with the insurance buying public. So my role in working with the public right now is generally in concert with another insurance agent or financial advisor.
Why would another insurance agent or financial advisor come to you? How does that work?
It's part of the distribution of life insurance. An insurance company designs and creates and issues an insurance contract, but they don't distribute it very well. And so they hire people like me to reach out to other insurance agents and act as a sales resource. So my company is the regional office for about 40 different life insurance and annuity companies. And the insurance company, the manufacturer, comes to us. We spread the good word out into the insurance community.
So it sounds like that's primarily an educational role.
There's a lot of education in it, yes.
Okay. So let's talk about the education that happens when you have direct contact with the ultimate purchaser of a policy, the consumer. How would you go about, you introduce yourself and you start the conversation. What is the area of focus at the very beginning if you're working with a new consumer, new potential customer?
Well, the first steps, the hardest thing in our business is to get in front of somebody on a favorable basis. And when we get to that point, then there's a questionnaire. It's time to ask about the person's, their lifestyle, their needs, what it is that they need to insure. And we often do reviews of existing insurance and then try to do what we think of as needs-based selling. And so we don't know when I speak as an insurance agent, meets with someone who might be interested in insurance, we don't really know if they need any insurance, or if they do, how much they need. And so there's a process where we go through to try to determine how much life insurance is appropriate for their needs.
When you talk about need in that sense, are you essentially projecting into the future what they will need when the life insurance that's in force actually then comes into play and provides a benefit to them?
Yes, we should, if we could narrow this down to personal insurance rather than business insurance, business life insurance, we'd look at first and foremost income replacement. So if you're dealing with a married couple and both of those couples have income, and one of the couple were to die when they die, then that income disappears, and the life insurance is thought as an attempt to replace that income. Secondarily, if the couple has debt, such as a mortgage, that they wish to retire, since generally both couples' income goes to support the mortgage, then oftentimes the amount of the mortgage is considered a need in this calculation equation.
Okay. So it sounds like there are two main components that you're projecting when you're thinking about what will they need in the future, what needs are we trying to meet. You're looking at whether there's a large specific debt that needs to be retired, and that almost always would be a mortgage. Is that correct?
Mortgage, autos, credit card.
Okay. And then you're looking at what they will need just to survive, all sorts of other expenses, right? Just
Right. Spousal income replacement.
how do you apply that? How does that relate to the age of the people who are sitting in front of you seeking this advice from you?
It is very age specific. If I'm in front of a 30-year-old couple that have had their first child and expect more and have 30 or more years of work life in front of them, then the dollar amount of the income we need to replace, or the multiple of the income that we're looking to replace, is larger. So a 30-year-old might need 30 times their income to sustain the remaining spouse, whereas someone in their 50s might need 10 to 20 times, and someone 60, 65 and older might even need less. 10 to 15 times is pretty typical in that age group.
So if for example, the couple that you're talking with are somewhere in the 50s to 60s range, well, first of all, it sounds like you work for an enormous number of companies or represent, what did you say, 40 or 50?
Around, yeah, over the years, at least that many.
Okay. Is there a uniform approach that the companies take? Is there some sort of standard that applies across all companies, or is there variance from company to company about how those tables break down, and what, for instance, you would be expected or encouraged to recommend to a couple that came in that was, say, one's around 55 and the other one's around 60?
Yeah, these are guidelines. There are no hard and fast rules really, but the insurance company's objective is to place a maximum amount of insurance that corresponds to the need of this person. So the guidelines are quite similar, but one company might provide 10 times income at 60, and another company might do 15. And so, I mean, that's quite a broad range if you think about the overall picture. And so it's just generally a guideline.
Okay. Did you have occasion in this, well, first of all, can you remember approximately how long ago it was that we came to you and started asking some of these questions and asked you whether you'd be available to testify in this case?
It has to be over a year, maybe more than that, I think.
Okay. Did you have occasion during this process to actually look at some of the companies for which there were policies in force for Mr. Brophy at the time he died?
I did. Our office represents several of the companies that insured Mr. Brophy, and I did look at their guidelines and prepared some of that and delivered to you, and I believe there are exhibits in the case today.
Let's go through some of those. Mr. Breton, would you bring up 296, Defense 296? Do you have some in front of you, or should I bring them up?
I can see them well.
Okay. So what are we looking at here?
This is the financial underwriting guide from Lincoln National Insurance Company. They were the provider of the group insurance for Mr. Brophy through OCI. And what we're looking at now is the multiples of income based on the applicant's age. So if I were a financial advisor and I was speaking to someone about insurance and they were between 18 and 35, I could expect that Lincoln National would approve, assuming that person's in good health, up to 30 times their annual income for life insurance. So if a person made $50,000 a year, times 30 would be $1.5 million that person would be able to qualify for under from a financial standpoint. And then, as you can see, as the person ages, that number goes down. And I believe Mr. Brophy was purchasing most of his insurance between age 46 and 60 and 61 to 65. And so under Lincoln National's guidelines, he would have qualified for up to 20 times or 10 times his income as a guideline.
And when you say qualified for, now is this a recommendation that Lincoln would make to these prospective customers, or is that a hard cap on the amount that would be available?
No, Lincoln doesn't make these recommendations. These are guidelines for agents to go by,
Right.
so that an agent doesn't apply for $10 million of life insurance on a 65-year-old making $50,000 or $60,000 a year. It just wouldn't be approved.
Right.
And so agents will refer to this to sort of set limits, but it's Lincoln doesn't reach out to the consumer and advise on that matter.
Okay, but to the extent that Lincoln is providing guidance to those of you who would be interacting with the consumers, this is the guidance that they would expect you to share.
Yeah, I guess my answer would be that an agent could refer to these guidelines to get sort of a maximum amount of life insurance that a person could qualify for.
Okay, and it appears, at least with Lincoln, even if you were 65 and came in and applied for this, you still would be eligible for up to 10 years your income.
10 times, that's right.
Times.
So yeah, $50,000 of income would qualify you for $500,000 of life insurance, or a maximum of $500,000, and then they might add in if you had a mortgage on top of that.
Okay. But if you had gone in to apply for the same thing a couple days before your 60th birthday, you might then be approved for twice as much.
That's right. And again, these are guidelines. They're not, everybody's situation is a little different. And Lincoln uses these as guidelines. And then there are people that make these decisions behind the scenes after interacting with the agent and reviewing a complete application.
Okay. Well, let's go to 292, just so we can compare these other companies that were involved here. This is Foresters. Do you have the page in front of you that we want to go to?
Right there.
Okay, great, thank you. So how does the Foresters guideline compare to the one that we were just reviewing for Lincoln?
So Foresters' ages are a little different. They're 61 to 65 is the same, 10x, and 51 to 60, 15 times.
Okay, so they broke that middle age guideline into two components, broke that up a little bit more.
Correct.
All right, what about, Mr. Breton, would you go to 293? And which page would you like him to go to on this one? There.
I guess I'm waiting for a question.
No, I asked whether you have the page number that he should go to. He's
I
just
don't
paging
see,
through it.
I don't see as you page through those, I don't believe I saw a multiple in that guide.
Okay, all right, well, let's go to 294 then.
And I'm not sure that there's a multiple in this either. I
All
think
right.
that this exhibit shows some other things about this insurance contract.
All right, so of the two that we've looked at so far, though, does that seem fairly representative of what you've seen over the years?
It is. It's quite representative in the industry that 50 to 65 would be 10, 15, 20 times income as a guideline.
So when you applied that to the insurance that was actually in force for the Brophies, how did that compare?
It was right down the middle. He had, on the date of his death, he had about just a little over $800,000 of life insurance. And I looked at, about 1,000 pages of subpoena documents that represent the entire file from each of the insurance companies that had insurance on him. And in these applications, he had different incomes, different years. I saw numbers as low as $50,000 and as high as $70,000. And somewhere in the documents, I believe I saw a mortgage of about $250,000. And so the amount of insurance of $800,000 was in the ballpark at, say, 10 times $60,000, which is $600,000 added to some part of the $250,000 mortgage.
Okay. And is there an understanding in the industry across these companies about how exactly you measure income? For instance, whether it's the W-2 income, whether it's the gross income, whether it's the adjusted? I mean, what income figure are we actually looking at here?
This is thought of as gross income. So we don't worry about taxes or expenses, because the expenses of a person they're due, and the life insurance is going to help pay those expenses. So most people would say, if I were having an interview with a prospective client, I'd ask what their income was. And if they said that was $100,000 and they were age 50, I'd say you could qualify for up to possibly $1.5 million of life insurance, regardless of tax situation, other expenses.
Okay. Mr. Breton, would you pull up Exhibit 288, please? Did you prepare this chart?
I did.
All right. Tell us what we're looking at. Let's start with the first half. Thank you, Mr. Breton.
So this is a chart that shows the life insurance policies that were applied for and put in place by Daniel Brophy over the last 7 years of his life. And I got these numbers from the subpoena documents, and it starts with, would you like me just to walk through the chart?
I would, please.
So in 2011, and I chose 2011 because we didn't want to run back to 1994 when Mr. Brophy first purchased a $100,000 policy from F&G Life as part of a divorce decree, I believe. And that policy was still in force in 2011, and to my knowledge, was the only life insurance insuring Mr. Brophy's life. In 2012, the blue bar on the bottom represents the F&G policy is still in force. And then he purchased an additional $40,000 of life insurance from Foresters, and that's the yellow bar. He also purchased $250,000 of accidental death benefit insurance from Mutual of Omaha, and that is the blue bar on top. And then we get back to the orange bar. He purchased a $150,000 20-year term life insurance policy from an agent, not Nancy Brophy, but another agent that was pure term life insurance.
Okay. And did that coverage change much over the next couple of years?
The dollar amount didn't change, but one of the policies did change. So if you looked at 2013, you'll see that the blue F&G policy is still in force for $100,000. The Foresters policy is still there for $40,000. But the orange bar has become a gray bar, and that's because the Mutual of Omaha $150,000 20-year term plan was lapsed and rewritten by Nancy Brophy. And she was the agent and represented Mutual of Omaha, completed an application, and the coverage was replaced. So she could be the servicing agent, and The blue bar on top represents the $250,000 accidental death policy, which is still in force.
So why don't I stop you there and we'll take our afternoon break and
Sure.
we'll resume at 3:30.
All right, thank you.
All rise.
All right, please be seated. And Ms. Weinmiller, if you want to continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Mr. Lenz, looking at this colorful chart that you've devised, it appears from this that there was never a point that more than just about $810,000 of life insurance was in force on Dan Brophy's life.
That's right. Based on my analysis of the documents, the maximum amount of coverage that was in force at any one time was in 2016, $811,500.
And I know we've had some testimony about a small loan that was taken out against one of these policies, but would the maximum amount have been $815,000 if there had been no loan taken out?
That's right. If the loan would not have been taken out, then that first year's loan was $3,500, and so the total would have been $815,000.
Okay. Were you able to listen to the testimony given by Steve Santos, the insurance expert for the state?
Yes, I was.
Now, he initially, as I'm sure you heard, had a much higher figure, but then corrected that and realized that figure had been too high, and ultimately testified that the insurance in force was about $715,000. Did you hear that testimony?
I did.
What's the difference between his figure of $715,000 and yours?
I included the $50,000 of group life insurance provided by OCI and the $50,000 of accidental death benefit coverage provided under that group plan. And I believe Mr. Santos couldn't determine for sure if it was in force or not at the time, and chose to omit it and then make a note of that.
Okay. All right. So you believe let me ask you this. How many policies did you find were in force at the time of Dan Brophy's death?
Yeah, I had this memorized, but I'm going to look.
It may be helpful to go, Mr. Breton, to Exhibit 287.
I found that there were 6 policies in force at the date of death.
All right. And did some of those policies have 2 different types of components?
Yes, there are a couple of policies that have a base plan of life insurance that pays from death by natural causes as well as accidents. And that is the Americo Policy, which had a $100,000 base plan and a $25,000 accidental death benefit. And the Lincoln National Group Plan had a $50,000 base plan and a $50,000 accidental death benefit.
There is, and I don't see it here on this chart, I didn't see it on Mr. Santos either, but there's been some testimony about another small policy, a life map policy.
Yes, there's mention of a $2,500 union benefit life insurance policy that neither of us could determine if it was in force at the date of death from the documents that we reviewed. So I believe we've both chosen to omit it. I have chosen to omit it for that reason.
Okay, but that's only $2,500.
It's a very small policy, $2,500.
All right. Now, of the coverage that was in force at the time of his death, let's call it 815, just to make it easy. Of that amount, is that all just life insurance, or is part of that the accidental death that you just described?
It's all life insurance, and it is a combination of the base underlying plan as well as the accidental death benefit portion of the policy. And in the case of the Mutual of Omaha policy, the $250,000 is accidental death benefit only. It does not have a death from natural causes.
All right. And so how did that break down? With the base, what we think of as just the standard traditional life insurance, what was the amount of the coverage in force, not including the accidental death coverage?
There was $490,000 of base insurance and $325,000 of accidental death benefit coverage.
All right. And based on the information available to you about the Brophy income and Mr. Brophy's income in particular, again, did that seem to be an appropriate amount of insurance to have in force on him?
Yes, I'd say he was adequately insured, not underinsured and not overinsured.
Okay. Now, there is also a column off to the right here that addresses the monthly premiums. I gather from the description that you gave us that the starting point for talking with new customers or clients is to determine what they're going to need in the future.
That's right.
At what point do you turn to the question of what they can afford, what their budgets are, and how to go about figuring out how to meet that need that they're going to have in the future?
Life insurance is very much priced across a very large and wide spectrum. And so after an insurance agent does a fact finder and an interview with the client and determines, and possibly the agent and the client mutually agree on an amount of insurance, let's say in this case $800,000, then it's a question of what type of insurance is appropriate. And insurance can be purchased for 1 month, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or out through literally age 125, which most people are dead by then. And so the longer the life insurance lasts, the more likely there will be a claim, and therefore the more expensive or the cost is greater for a policy that lasts out to and beyond a person's natural life expectancy.
So you'll have to, of course, work with the clients to figure out whether, for instance, a 10-year term policy that would expire then would be of any real benefit to them, correct? You're looking at what their goals are and what they're trying to achieve and what period of life they would want that insurance to cover, correct?
Right. Sometimes a 10-year term policy is the exact right policy for a situation. Other times it's a stopgap measure, and sometimes it's what a person can afford.
So when do you start, when in the process do you start working into that, what the premiums are going to be and how that's going to work for them in the near term? Obviously, having great coverage works very well in the long term, but how do you blend those considerations between what you can afford now or what it will do to you to find a way to afford the coverage now and the benefit that it provides later?
It's part of the process is after we determine that a person needs $800,000 of insurance, we might say, do we need all $800,000 of that insurance for your entire life? Or let's say that a person's mortgage was going to be paid off in 10 years. We might need some of the insurance to only last for 10 years. If you had student loans that were going to be gone in a certain period of time, you might have insurance that lasts that long. Or if you had children that were relying on your income to go to college, then you might have insurance that lasted until you hoped your last child was out of college. And then if you wanted to cover Social Security replacement, then maybe you might want an insurance policy that lasts out to and beyond your spouse's life expectancy.
Are there also guidelines that you at least have in mind yourself as you're working with people to help them figure out what the best policies are? And in part, looking at that part of the equation, what can they afford now?
Yes, there are guidelines, but most of those are really a function of a client's budget. Once you've agreed on this number of $800,000, then it's a question of can the client afford the life insurance? Because the best life insurance is the life insurance that pays a death benefit when you die. And short-term term insurance policies are priced with the expectation that most people will outlive that 10-year period. And so most insurance agents, if they can identify a long-term need, are likely to recommend a long-term policy that costs a little more.
Let me ask you about some of the terminology. Mr. Santos went over some of this, but it probably would be helpful to do it again. what's the difference between, for instance, a whole life policy and term insurance?
So a whole life policy lasts for your whole life, even if you manage to live to age 100 or beyond. If you pay that level premium through that period of time, then the death benefit will be paid to you. So that's thought of as whole life or permanent insurance. A term insurance policy is for a specific term of years. It could be a single year, or some insurance companies offer policies as long as 40 years of level term insurance.
Okay. And are those the two basic categories? I mean, leaving aside for a moment.
Those are the two
accidental-
basic categories, yeah.
Okay. And of the policies that were in force on Dan Brophy's, on June 2nd on his life, and referring again to Exhibit 287, which of these, can you describe just briefly what each of these are? Looks like
Yes,
you've got a column for that there on the left-hand side.
I do. The F&G Life, or Fidelity and Guarantee Life, was a 10-year level term insurance policy that was issued in 1994. It had a level premium of about $18 a month for the first 10 years. And then it was renewed at about $43 a month for the next 10 years. And then again in 2014, I believe it renewed for about $103 per month for the next 10 years.
So at least with respect to that particular Fidelity policy, even though it was a 10-year term policy, it was something that could be renewed. It didn't just automatically expire at 10 years.
That's right. Most policies have the option to renew, and in the policy is a schedule of premiums that are the maximum contractual premiums. The company may choose to charge less.
But that, in fact, when it renewed, it went from what had been an $18 a month premium to $103, I believe you said?
That's right. It more than doubled on its first renewal and more than doubled on its second renewal.
Okay. All right. What about the Foresters policy right under that?
So the Foresters policy was purchased in 2012. It's a universal life policy, which is sometimes thought of as synonymous with whole life insurance, in that it is a permanent life insurance policy designed to last for an entire lifetime, not a term insurance plan. And when Mr. Brophy purchased the policy, the proposal that came with the sales presentation showed that this policy was going to last beyond his life expectancy out through age 83 or 89, depending on whether it was the guaranteed length of the policy or the current projected length of the policy. And in addition to that, a large portion of the premium he was paying was going into a cash value account, which was adding to his death benefit each month.
Okay. And when you say he was paying, the premiums were being paid, you presume, by the household, but we don't know that it was.
Yes, when I say he, I guess I'd refer to the fact that he owned the policy.
Okay.
And so I'd refer to him as the payor, but oftentimes in a couple, it's they, them.
Right, right. Okay. So the Americo, it looks like that's also a universal policy.
That's right. Slightly different design. It was $100,000 of insurance purchased in 2014, and that policy had a unique feature in that at the end of the 20th year, that 100% of the premiums paid into the insurance policy could be returned to the policy owner if they chose to surrender the contract. So people will buy.
Let's come back to that in
Yeah.
a minute, but the Mutual of Omaha, that one is only accidental death. Why are policies like that purchased?
Well, I think people see that people die of accidents, car crashes and airplanes and the like, rocks rolling off a hill. That happened recently. And so people can purchase quite a large amount of insurance for a small price because the chances of them dying of accident are less than natural causes.
Okay. Then sometimes the sort of facetiously referred to as texting while driving insurance.
I've heard it described as texting while driving insurance, yes.
And the premiums on that are quite a bit lower.
They're very low.
All right, and then the last two, the Lincoln National Group, now you've referred to that as the coverage that was afforded by his employment at OCI, correct?
That's right. It's a level term plan that I believe all employees would have been covered under that for $50,000, and then $50,000 additional if the death were by accident.
And the last, American Amicable, that's also a term policy?
That's right. It was the last policy purchased. It's a $200,000 level term insurance plan that lasted 10 years at that level price.
What were you able to determine about what the premiums attributable to all of that coverage were?
I added it up on the right, and the premium was $778.58. And I took a little liberty with that with Mutual of Omaha, since it did insure both Dan Brophy for $250,000 and Nancy Brophy for $250,000. And I only included the $33.80 that were attributable to Dan's coverage.
You just split that equally between them because it covered both of them?
Correct.
Okay. So going back to the question about what the guidelines are for how much seems appropriate to spend on life insurance premiums. What are the standards? I know you said there aren't any hard and fast guidelines, but what guidance is available?
There's really little guidance from the insurance companies because they leave that to the individual purchaser. The insurance companies that do issue guidelines, I believe, if you want to return to the Lincoln Financial underwriting guidelines, they have a written premium guideline. I can get you an exhibit number if you'd like it.
I was going to ask you first about 289. Are you familiar with the website called The Balance?
Sure.
Do you hear Mr. Santos referring to that in his testimony?
Yes, in fact, that's why I created an exhibit for that, since the jury and the court would already be familiar with this website, thebalance.com, from his testimony.
Okay, Mr. Breton, can you bring that up, 289? Right, you've got that there in front of you?
I do.
And then what is that guidance with respect to a percentage? I take that, I don't see anything here defining income, is that correct?
I didn't hear you.
In this, at least in the exhibit, there's nothing that defines what type of income we're using to measure this. It's a percentage of what? Just income.
On this page, there is not any indication about whether this is gross income or after-tax income.
Okay. But your expectation is that they're referring to what?
My expectation is, and from further reading that website, that this is described as after-tax income.
All right. And I can see here that you've highlighted a recommendation that 10 to 20% of income be spent on insurance.
I did.
And they're defining insurance broadly to include health insurance, auto insurance, medical insurance, and life insurance.
It appears so.
Okay. And then there's also a category here for savings of 10 to 15%.
Yes, and I highlighted that because over half of the money that Mr. Brophy was spending for life insurance had a savings component. And that savings component would have returned his premium, or possibly even more than his premium. And so part of a life insurance policy is it goes beyond just pure insurance. It's insurance plus a savings account in case of one of Mr. Brophy's policies.
Well, let's look at those more specifically. And was there something else that you wanted to go over in the Lincoln exhibit that you just found in front of you?
No, there's a reference there to a chart that says that the company would expect a guideline to be 20% of income for the purchase of life insurance as a maximum for a person making $50,000 a year.
Okay, all right. So let's go to Exhibit 290, Mr. Breton. And I see at the bottom there that now the top is identical to the chart we were just looking at, is it not?
That's right.
All right, so Mr. Breton, can you focus on the lower half of that, the part that we haven't looked at yet? Blow that up even a little bit more. Thank you. All right, you've got the policies here, the 6 policies that we've been discussing. You've got those broken down into 2 different categories. And you were beginning to describe that there are policies that the Brophies had that were enforced on Mr. Brophy's life that had a savings function built into them.
That's right. The Forcer's policy, only about 40%, I believe, of the premium actually went to provide the $40,000 of death protection. And the other amount went into a separate account, part of the insurance contract, but it was added to the $40,000 to determine what the death benefit was. And it was available to them if they surrendered the policy or if they would like to borrow those funds.
Right, Mr. Breton, would you go to state 73 and then go down to page 78? What does this chart show us about that policy?
This chart shows the annual premium out at his age 84. And it might be that the page before that would show when he originally initiated the policy.
Can you go back to the page before it? Okay.
So this shows Mr. Brophy paying $157.07 a month. And this is a year-by-year projection of his life insurance policy when he purchased it. And there are 3 separate columns. You mind if I use a pointer?
Not at all, please do.
So at age 59, Mr. Brophy purchased this policy and paid $1,885. Under the guaranteed worst case scenario, meaning the company charged the maximum amount for claims and mortality and paid the minimum interest rate on these extra monies, that there would have been a death benefit of $41,163, which is comprised of the $40,000 of life insurance death benefit and the $1,163 of savings or cash value that was part of the contract. If the insurance company paid the interest rate of 5.75% and deducted the projected or current cost of insurance and expenses in the policy, then there would have been $1,375 in the contract and $41,375 of death benefit at the end of the first year. And the rest of it is a chart going forward. So you might go out to the 10th year.
Okay, let's do that. Let's see how that plays out over time.
I continue.
Why don't you go 10 years down just so we have that point of comparison?
So in the 10th year, again, this projection at the time of the sale, he'll be 68 years old, paying his same premium. And so the sum of that would be about $18,850 that had been paid into the insurance contract. Under the guaranteed worst case scenario, $11,216 would be in the account value, and $51,216, the 40 plus that would be the death benefit. Had the insurance company paid 5.75% in interest and deducted their current costs of insurance and expenses through that period, then we would have expected there to be $15,613 of cash in the account and $55,613 of death benefit.
Okay, so for each year that they're contributing $1,885 to it, about how much of it is actually ending up in that savings component? How much of that is still available to them?
That number changes each year. And so if you took, call it $1,200 or $1,800, about, what is that, 65% of it went into the cash account in the first year. But as Mr. Brophy aged, the cost of the underlying $40,000 expenses increased, but interest was credited to his account value. So Only an actuary could answer that accurately.
Okay, but at the beginning, about 2/3 of it is going directly into the savings component.
About,
Okay, and then that is decreasing somewhat, except that there's potentially an offset from the insurance or the interest that's being paid.
potentially.
Okay, all right. So let's talk, is there anything else you'd like to discuss while we've got the forester's policy up?
I think there's one other thing that that might be worth looking at is that there is a difference in the, if you look at year one, while there's $1,100 or $1,300, none of it was available to Dan Brophy because the insurance company assesses an early surrender penalty if you cancel the policy or attempt to borrow against it in the early years. And in the 10th year, there's still a penalty here of what, about $1,000 or so. And by the time the 15th, in fact, the 16th year rolls along, that penalty is gone. And that's a penalty to protect the insurance company's payment of commission to the sales agent, that if someone purchases a policy and leaves early, they're not going to recover that early cash value.
Okay, but by the time you get 10 or 15 years into it, most of that is available to the consumer, the purchaser,
That's right.
or the owner of the policy, I guess I should say. And you were able to determine that Mr. Brophy in fact owned this policy?
I reviewed the application under the subpoena documents, and I believe Mr. Brophy was the owner of this policy, yes.
Okay. Now, there was another one you said also had a cash component to it on 290, that is the Americo Policy. Can we go back to 290, Mr. Breton? Thank you. So the premiums on these two that have a cash value, those premiums come to $422.57.
That's right.
And the total premium that was being paid for the policies in force on his life was $778.58. So well over 50% was going into these policies that had some sort of cash value as well.
Approximately 54% of the cost of his insurance was purchasing policies with a cash value component.
Okay, now how did the Americo policy work? And Mr. Britton, I think he'll want to see state 71 at page 26. Yeah,
Mind if I point again?
not at all. And is that positioned well, or would you like it down a little bit? Yeah.
That's
that
what I
looks
like
better.
right there.
Great.
This policy, unlike the Forester's policy, did not have an early accumulation feature. This is a policy that is asking you to stay all 18, 19, or 20 years, and even a little longer. And if you do, the insurance company will refund some percentage of the premiums you've paid in. So in this case, and this is a $100,000 policy, and you can see that the death benefit is level at 100. Unlike the Forester's policy that's increasing, this policy remains level until out here in the 20th year when the policy value spikes up because of this large surrenderable amount. So Mr. Brophy in the 20th year could have surrendered his policy and received $63,720 back, which is a refund of his entire premiums paid to date. That number then dropped off a little bit in the 25th year, and the policy had lapsed in the 30th year.
Okay. And what is it that would have been available to him at that point in time?
At which point?
What, let's say 25 years into it.
In the 20th year, $63,000.
Okay.
So which is 100% of what he paid. And there's elsewhere in the exhibit, there's a larger, I believe, 50% or 75% or 25% of the amount was available in the 18th and 19th year. But these policies were designed to keep for 20 years and then receive back 100% of the deposit. Now, at age 78, if Mr. Brophy was not in good health, he could have opted to keep the life insurance policy, continue to pay the premium, and keep the $100,000 of death benefit. if he didn't want the $63,000.
Okay, so that's an either or. You either take the cash back or you keep the policy in force.
That's right.
But if you have a need for that money at the age of 78, it will then be available to you, no strings attached.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you mentioned essentially, and I think I'm paraphrasing what you said, but that the company is in some ways encouraging the customer to then take that cash benefit at that age.
No, I wouldn't say they're encouraging that. I would say that that is an option because this policy costs a lot more than just a regular 20-year term plan that had no refund option. And the insurance company is going to collect a lot of more premium early on, and that's better for their books.
Okay. So why is it that that end of year cash benefit drops off at the age of 25 years into it at the age of 83?
This premium is insufficient to purchase $100,000 of this type of coverage beyond about the 25th year. So it eventually would go to zero and lapse.
Okay.
And unfortunately, there's not a year-by-year description that I found that went from 20 to 30 or beyond.
Okay. Now let's go back to Exhibit 290. You might want to sit down for a moment, but that's up to you. So now in this lower block in the lower left-hand corner, where it says pure protection policies, no cash value, you've got 4 of the policies listed there.
Correct.
You've described essentially how most of those work, but we haven't talked much yet about the American Amicable Policy, the one that's at the bottom. That is a term insurance policy.
That's right. It's a level 10-year term policy, meaning that the policy lasts for 10 years at that guaranteed level premium of $219. And the death benefit was $200,000, and there was no accidental death benefit component.
Okay. Now, is that also a term policy that the Brophies could have expected to renew after that they hit that term?
It did have a renewal option, and unlike the F&G policy that had renewal options of 10-year increments, this policy renewed 1 year at a time. And so in the 11th year, the premium took a dramatic increase, and in the 12th year, more and more and more, until at some point, they become difficult to maintain.
All right. Was there anything about that policy in particular that did provide an additional benefit besides just the death benefit that we've talked about here, the typical term insurance?
That policy had 2 riders, which is an additional benefit in the policy. And the first rider allowed the policy owner, in this case, Mr. Brophy, he's the insured person, if he were diagnosed with a terminal illness, I believe that was determined to mean his life expectancy was less than 1 year, that the insurance company would pay out the death benefit while he was living, because they're about to pay it out anyway.
So, Mr. Breton, would you go to State 70 and then go to page 33 in that exhibit?
So this is the second rider. This is called an accelerated benefits rider. And if you could scroll a little, this rider basically allowed the insured person to receive, and the owner of the policy, to receive $5,000 per month, which is 2.5% of the $200,000 benefit, if they are confined full-time in a nursing home.
So does that in some ways serve the same purpose as long-term care insurance?
Yes, it serves, long-term care insurance provides a monthly or daily benefit for people who are confined in a long-term care facility. But this is a very limited scope long-term care benefit, and I wouldn't want to be on record as saying that this functions like a long-term care policy, but it does provide almost all of that $200,000 at a rate of $5,000 a month for long-term care benefits.
Okay, so there's a limitation built in based on the face value of the policy. The 200,000 is a hard cap.
2.5, actually, it's 2.5% of the policy, or $5,000 per month, the lesser of the two.
Right, but the cap is the 200,000 value of the policy itself, the death benefit.
In this
value.
case, it would actually be $195,000 because after you've taken $5,000 a month down to where the base policy is $5,000 left, then the benefit stops and the insurance remains in force until death and pays the rest of the $5,000.
Okay, all right. But in Exhibit 290, the one with the pie chart, right, are you going back to that? Even though there is potentially a means to access some of that cash during Mr. Brophy's lifetime, if he's ill enough to invoke that provision. And I understand that's a little bit more limited than long-term care, but it could be described as more near-terminal long-term care.
Actually, it wouldn't, there's two benefits. The terminal illness benefit and the long-term care benefit simply requires a letter from your physician stating that you're going into a nursing home and likely not to come out alive.
Okay, now could that
So you don't have to
also-
be near terminal, you just need to be expected to stay for the rest of your life.
All right, so for instance, if you had Alzheimer's or something like that, that you weren't likely to recover from once you entered.
Or one many other afflictions, right?
Okay, all right. All right, so even though there is this potential to access the benefit during one's lifetime, you don't take it out as cash, but you can apply it as a cash equivalent to achieve that care.
People purchase this type of rider or insurance because they don't have cash assets to provide long-term care benefits. But I didn't include it in the policies with a cash value component because it truly had no cash value, couldn't surrender the policy or take a loan against the policy. But it did provide a $5,000 a month benefit while living.
Okay. Now, are some of these policies, both the ones that you do have in that top part of the chart, the policies with the cash value component, and this one, are these the types of policies that you sometimes see people decide to purchase, decide that these policies and this kind of coverage is right for them because they don't have a lot of, their net worth is not terribly high?
I see people purchase this type of insurance because they want this insurance to be in force for the rest of the insured's lifetime.
Okay.
That way you know that there's going to be a claim paid. So there's a lot of other reasons, but in terms of whether or not a person buys a permanent life insurance policy or a term life insurance policy is a question about expectation and if they need that death benefit for the rest of their life.
Okay. So how is your advice different to a couple in their, mid-50s or 60s that come in that have a decent net worth but are not independently wealthy? Does that affect the type of coverage you recommend for them?
Ultimately, things are driven by a budget. But as we talked about, as I spoke of earlier, the first step in this process is to determine how much life insurance this person needs. And then the question is, how do we pay for it? And if a person needs $800,000 of life insurance right now, and that their spouse would not be able to maintain their lifestyle, then they might purchase all term life insurance because that's all they can afford. Or they might purchase all permanent life insurance because they can afford and they want that premium and they do want that benefit intact for the rest of their life. Or there could be, as there is in this case, some blend of those two ideas.
Okay. Now, if a couple were to have come up with a plan that they thought made a lot of sense for them, they considered it a really good plan, but then went through a period in which it was somewhat difficult to cover all the bills, get everything taken care of, would you recommend to them that they jettison the life insurance as the first place that they save money?
Generally not in the first place. Uh, I would generally ask a couple to, if they can't afford their lifestyle, to look at what things they're purchasing that aren't important and necessary, and maybe jettison those first. And the life insurance, and again, I admit to a bias. I come from an insurance career my entire life. I value life insurance, and my advice, to answer your question succinctly, my advice would be to look at other things to try to do without to keep their insurance.
Okay, and if they could come up with a plan, as difficult as it might have been during certain months, if they could come up with a plan to keep the policies in force, why would that be a good idea?
Well, death is ultimately, we're all getting there. And so at some point, those insurance policies are likely to pay a benefit. And I, I guess my advice as a financial advisor and an insurance agent would be, what else can you eliminate and keep these policies? Because if you do jettison the policies or let them lapse, and you need them again, then you must go through a process. And that process is proving that you're healthy enough to qualify for that life insurance now. And if you've let those policies lapse and now you've aged, then that life insurance is likely to cost more, and your health may have changed, and which could also increase the price. So letting life insurance lapse, thinking that I'll buy it again tomorrow or the next year or 5 years from now, is generally not a great strategy.
And if there have been some health changes, is it possible that it might just not be available? Not just that it might be cost prohibitive, but that it might just be simply unavailable?
That's yes.
Okay. Is that something that you would consider if you were counseling people who were in their 60s?
Absolutely.
No further questions. Thank you.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hello.
I apologize because I may jump around a little bit, but I'll try and direct us to the right place. Kind of ending on what you just talked about, or looping that into some of your previous discussion. You mentioned when you're looking at coverage, you're looking at your gross income. Is that right?
When you're looking at a coverage, like a maximum coverage you
Right.
qualify.
The
That-
replacement of income.
Yeah,
type
I'd
of-
say the industry looks at your gross income in determining how much insurance you could qualify for.
And would you agree then when you're looking at budget, so your actual premiums that you're paying, that you're looking more at net income or what your actual like cash flow is that you're dealing with?
Yes, generally, if you've spent your income for taxes, then it's not available for the purchase of insurance.
And if you're contributing to a 401k, if there's money getting taken out of your paycheck that you're never seeing, would you consider that money that you're contributing elsewhere to be income that you have available in your budget to pay your premiums?
I guess I'd say that contributing to a 401k is a choice. And so if a person were to ask my advice, should I buy adequate life insurance for my family or contribute to my 401k, then depending on their situation, I might advise that the life insurance is more important than the 401k.
All right. And so you're kind of taking in each of those individual budget factors as you're advising people personally, or as your company is?
I would personally do that, yes.
Okay. And I wasn't sure when you were talking about Exhibit 289, which was the balance website, and sort of that list of percentages. Is this something that you also rely on, or was it different than how you would advise?
No, there's really very little definitive information on the internet or in the industry that says you should spend this much for food and this much for gas and this much for your car payment. And so I relied on this. I thought Mr. Santos referred to this. The jury would be familiar with it. It was within my parameters as well. I did look online and found numerous other references from well-known financial pundits that were in this same range.
And are you specifically talking about that 10 to 20% range for insurances as a whole?
Yes, the one that if you Googled this and said budget percentages, the most popular one is from Dave Ramsey, a well-known financial analyst, and he lists 10 to 25% for all insurance. But again, because everyone was familiar with this, I stuck with this.
Sure. So would you say in your own practice, then I guess that 10 to 25% or somewhere in that range makes sense to you?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay. And as part of that, are you factoring in like the important things that people need to pay? And I think this is what you were talking about. There's some things that are important and some things you can back off of.
That's right.
And would you agree that paying your mortgage is more important than paying your life insurance premiums?
I'd say it's very important to pay your mortgage, and I don't want to quibble which is more important or less important, but I would say that paying your mortgage is an essential thing to do if you want to keep your home.
All right. And would it be part of your practice then, or as you're sitting down with a couple, and I recognize it depends on their age and their circumstances, so I'm talking very, 10-foot view generally, or 200-foot view generally speaking. But would it be fair to say that, and I think this is what you mentioned earlier when you're talking about the type of policies, that sometimes you're going to recommend a cheaper term policy because that's just simply what makes sense for the budget?
That's right.
Even if it may mean that in 10 years, because you've aged 10 years, it might be slightly more, but you're factoring in what you can deal with right now.
Correct. I think it's most important to make sure that this, in your case, this hypothetical couple has adequate amount of life insurance, whether that's all term insurance or some blend, that's the number one consideration, is to make sure the couple is adequately insured.
And if you have every reason to believe, obviously understanding life happens, but that, you're healthy, your spouse is healthy, you have no necessary risk factors or anything that would suggest to you should try, be kind of cautious of what's to come in the next 15, 20 years. And let's say you're in your 50s or 60s. Is there a wide variety of policies that would make sense if you have really specific budget?
Well, there's certainly a wide variety of policies, and most couples in this hypothetical situation are going to look at their budget to determine whether they can afford something that only lasts for a few years or something that lasts for a much longer period of time. And generally that couple comes together. Insurance agents often advise in that arena, and insurance agents are not paid by the size of the life insurance policy they sell, but by the cost of the life insurance policy. So an insurance agent would often encourage someone to spend as much money as they can afford on life insurance, which delivers a better product at the end of the day, a policy that's going to last until claim.
And you mentioned when we were going through some of the policies, and I won't make you go back through them, that some of them had this, I think it's called scale is not the right word, but the percentage or sorry, I'm looking for the term, the income replacement calculator, or number of what, like 10 times, 15 times, 20 times. There's an M word there that I'm missing.
Multiple.
Thank you. Multiple. Are there factors that could keep that lower? For example, I think maybe as you explained that this is a guideline, this may answer my question. but are you always going to look at that range, or are there things based on a couple's individual circumstances that you may choose to do a lower than 10 times or lower than 15 times someone's income?
I would never do that. I think that if I was meeting with a couple and we looked at their mortgage balance, each of the spouse's income, uh, their situation on dependents at home, children, their other debt, and we came up with a number, and that number was $800,000, then I would look at them and say, we need to find a way to place $800,000 of life insurance on each of you, let's say. And most people don't really have a concept of how to come up with that number. And even in our business, it's a bit of an art more than science with guidelines. And so after that discussion of we need $800,000 of insurance, then would come the piece of the discussion on how long do we need that life insurance in force. And that then informs the budget or the cost of the insurance, and then we work that into the budget.
Okay. And would you agree then, you have, let's say, a couple who has a pretty specific budget and perhaps a lower budget than some others might, which I'm sure happens frequently. Would it be fair to say then that there are circumstances where you could get one policy for, let's say, $500,000 worth of coverage that might be cheaper than getting 3 policies that have $500,000 worth of coverage?
That absolutely could be the case.
And looping that in a little bit to talk about some of the 2 cash value policies that you mentioned here. I want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. For both, I realize they're different. The Foresters and Americo are different. Is that right? In terms of how they work?
They're very different.
Okay. But for both of them, is it true to say that if you are going to realize that cash value, in other words, if you're going to get that cash, you are then giving up your life insurance?
No, that's not necessarily true. For example, in the Foresters policies, Mr. Brophy took a $3,500 loan, I believe in 2014 or 15 or 16, and then he took a $1,450 loan the next year and maintained the life insurance. He would not have been able to take a loan from the Americo policy at this early stage in its life, but he would have been able to take some money out at a later date. But if he were to realize the entire $63,000 as a return of his premium, then he would have been taking that in lieu of the insurance plan.
Okay. And so is that part of that chart we looked at, which I think was on Americo, that as it goes down the line, and by that I mean you get older and you're paying more, that then there's more money you could take out in a loan capacity. But that ultimately, if your goal is a savings plan to get 100% of your premiums back on the Americo policy specifically, then you no longer are going to have that life insurance death benefit.
That's right. The Americo plan was marketed as home mortgage protection. So people might have the $100,000 of insurance to cover their mortgage, and when they reach the 20th year, as their mortgage declined and its balance declined, assuming they made their payments, then they might take the cash value of the policy and retire their mortgage or a large portion of it and no longer need the insurance.
And so in Mr. Brophy's case specifically, that would require, in order to get to that point where he's taking that money back, he's going to have to be at roughly 80 years old or so, assuming he got the policy, if I tell you got it when he was 60 years old.
I think he got it at age 58, so he'd be 78, approximately 80 years old when he did that. That's right.
Okay. And so you'd have to wait till that period of time before you could fully realize that amount of cash.
Yes, this policy had a specific feature that in the 20th year, after 20 years of payments have been made, that he could literally take out all of the money he put into the policy and surrender the insurance contract for it.
And I think you said this, but is part of that then that your premium you're paying for that specific policy is a lot higher than it would be for other policies of the same death benefit value?
Yes, if he were to have purchased a policy from Americo that did not have a return of premium feature, it would have probably cost less than half, maybe closer to 1/3, but then 100% of that money would have been lost versus getting 100% of it back.
And so the longer, with all of these sort of, or the cashback ones, the longer you go down the line, the more money you've put in, and presumably the more you'd hope you get to that point.
That is most often the case. There are some nuances there that would confuse us all.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that life insurance plans, generally speaking, and especially as you're going through all these policies, is just confusing, or can be confusing, if maybe not for you perhaps, but if you aren't quite as experienced or aren't as familiar with an individual policy that you're looking at?
I'd say that the life insurance policy itself is complex, and that it takes a trained professional to do that's licensed and trained in that product to communicate that and educate a potential policyholder before they purchase it. If that's the case, they're likely to keep the policy longer because they understand it. But yeah, each of these policies was very different. But the training that Nancy Brophy received in order to get her insurance license, and at the company she worked for, and the ongoing education that she had, I believe she would have been able to explain that to Mr. Brophy. I would have been able to explain it with that training.
Sure, and part of the licensing is that you get ongoing training on I assume it's a couple year basis.
That's right. Yeah, your license renews every 2 years, and you need 30-ish hours during that period of time.
And part of that training involves not only like the policies themselves, the types of policies, but like accidental benefit coverage, all the different riders, information on what those nuances mean for various policies.
That is an option with some of the continuing education courses. They're sort of specific to how insurance policies work, but generally the product training that would come with, say, Americo, the Americo policy would be provided by the insurance company or its general agent, its agency system, so that the agent would be able to explain it to the customer. That wouldn't be something that's part of the state-based ongoing continuing education.
So something specific to the type of insurance you're selling would then be kind of your knowledge and training in that particular type of insurance.
Yes, in fact, many insurance companies require an agent to go through a product training course with the insurance company that they built in order to sell their insurance policy.
And speaking of those riders and death benefits, you talked a little bit in what I think was Defense Exhibit 293 about that, and I wanted to just kind of touch base. I don't have page numbers on mine, but it looks like it's page 4. Oh yeah, this has page numbers. Page 4. They're kind of in different places on each page, but it's the one that has HMS 125 CBO as the headline of the top paragraph.
Is it the one that said, oh yeah, I see it, I'm on it, that can help you pay your mortgage at death?
Yeah, exactly, yes. And so in this particular one, there's a section here talking about what accidental death looks like. And it mentions that in this particular policy, and I suppose I should clarify, we're talking about the Americo policy, that if your death occurs prior to the end of the no lapse guarantee period, and it's talking about the result of an accidental injury, and how you can get what is this sort of paragraph explaining particular to this insurance?
Let me take 10 seconds and read through it.
Please.
So this is a feature that's built into the insurance policy that allows an additional 25% of the death benefit to be paid to the beneficiary of the policy if the insured person dies from an accident. So the base policy in this case was $100,000, and the accidental death benefit was 25% of that, which would be $25,000 if the death occurred because of an accident. There's an additional sentence that adds another 25% if you're a passenger on a fare-paying common carrier.
And I think we heard during Mr. Santos's testimony that that would include like an airplane or sort of those catastrophic casualties that we think of.
Yes, people are afraid of dying while flying.
And it looks like in your calculation, and I just want to make sure that that sort of what that paragraph says, you included in Exhibit 290, where you have the $100,000 for the base of the Americo, and then the $25,000 for the accidental death piece.
That's right. I broke them out so they could be distinct.
Okay. All right. And I assume you're including that because homicide or murder is included in accidental death.
Yes, death by gunshot is not an exclusion.
Okay. And I was trying to not to jump around here. Let me just. Oh, and you mentioned when talking about the Lincoln policy, group policy, that it was a couple of questions about that one. So, which is Exhibit 296. You mentioned that they have, Lincoln specifically has a chart at the bottom of that first page about percentage of income used for the premium.
That's right.
What, if any, sort of import does that have, or does it matter if it's like an employer-related insurance?
I would say it doesn't really have any import on this $50,000 base plan. That plan would have been issued to Mr. Brophy regardless of the amount of life insurance he had. And this was, in fact, this guideline is not meant to be a guideline for group life insurance. It's an individual life insurance, because I think that's really the issue here.
Okay. And you mentioned in referring to this, I think that the amount was preset by his employer, but did you actually see, as you're going through these policies, that Nancy Brophy applied for an increase in that amount of insurance?
I did. I saw that.
Okay. In 2017, does that sound right?
I believe what happens is each year you enroll when the window opens, and I saw that there was at least an application for additional insurance.
And it sounds like you had all of these policies. Is that fair to say, for the last year or so? Roughly?
I'm not sure. I don't think I had them for that long. I think I had them for several months. I had adequate time to review them.
Okay. In my main question is, in your review, I can see from some of these exhibits that they're pulled from other places, not just the documents that were provided. Is that fair to say?
I don't know where they were pulled from, but most of the documents I received were covered with a subpoena to the insurance company that I believe were asking for any and all documents related to this policy or other policies held by Mr. Brophy. And so when I read the documents, they appeared to be sourced from the correct place.
Okay. And in your review, did you have time to sort of look in depth at the policies? Did you do your own research into that type of policy, or call the companies, or any of that sort of follow up?
I did not need to call the insurance company to determine how the policies worked. I personally represent, our firm personally represents most of these companies and has for many years. I'm very familiar with them. And yes, I spent quite a bit of time looking at the policies.
And I think you said there's over 1,000 pages of.
There were over 1,000 pages, yeah.
As you were going through, in particular, the Mutual of Omaha policies, because those are the ones where there's the highest number of changes over time. Would it be fair to say different policies that lapsed or were replaced?
That's fair to say.
As opposed to the other ones. As you're going through the documents, did you notice that there was what I'll call an entry or notation from the company of a death claim made on all of the Mutual of Omaha policies?
I would not describe it as a death claim made on each policy. I believe when the company was notified of Mr. Brophy's death, that they went back and looked at every policy that had ever been in force and determined whether that policy was in force or not. And they noted the file. Mr. Brophy had a client number at Mutual of Omaha. And so when this death claim was reported by Ms. Brophy, the company went in and notated each of the policies, the 2 term policies that had lapsed, and the 2 accidental death policies, one of which was still in force, and put a claim notation against each of them. But I didn't find any documents that showed that Ms. Brophy was attempting to collect the benefits from any of the lapsed policies.
Sure. And it sounds like what you're saying too is that because of that same client number and everything being associated with that, they all came up even though 3 of those policies weren't actually in effect at the time the subpoena was sent or the records were requested.
That's exactly right.
Did you also notice as you're going through these policies that in the application for some of the policies, in the section that requires disclosure of other policies that are in effect, that the actual policies that were in effect at the time weren't always all listed on that application form?
I did see that.
And what, if anything, does that signify to you?
Permission to speak freely.
Yes, please.
It was, my opinion, it was sort of an oversight or sloppy work on the agent's part. And also, the insurance company has a poor form on one of those policies that asks, is there an insurance policy in force? Are you replacing it? And then a 1-inch box to write that information in. It's rarely an issue with this type of life insurance because the policies are often issued in relatively small amounts. But I did notice that that when the policies were applied for, that not all the existing insurance was noted on the form.
Check my notes here for a second. That is all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Before we go back to redirect, Ms. Weinmiller, do you have a rough idea how long that will take? I'm just mindful of where we are.
If the court wants to stop at 4:45, that would be tight.
We could stop at 4:50.
Might be able to do that.
Okay.
I can try. So, Mr. Lenz, with respect to this last issue that just came up and whether there were some deficiencies in the disclosures or the descriptions of the coverage in force made when new coverage was applied for, did you see any policy that you thought would not have issued if everything had been listed?
No, the amount of life insurance that was in force, had it been fully disclosed, would never have surpassed the guidelines. And it's often not disclosed by the client. Generally, the agent fills that part of it out. So I don't believe Dan Brophy was writing that information out there. His agent often does that.
Okay.
In this case, she would have known it.
And in this instance, they were actually well below that cap where the company would have said, gosh, this is too much, hold up, we won't do this, correct?
Yes, it's my professional opinion that if every insurance policy would have been outlined in its amount, that the insurance company would have approved the amount as it was under the guidelines.
Okay. And you said you listened to Mr. Santos' testimony? But his recommendation was that rather than purchasing the more expensive American Amicable policy, that it would have been better to get a Transamerica policy. Did you hear that part?
I did hear that, yeah.
And he, in fact, was recommending that Transamerica coverage would have provided an extra $300,000 of coverage for less money, correct?
I believe he said that he might have recommended some other insurance be canceled as part of that. I don't think he was trying to recommend that they had $1 million of insurance, but I do believe he was recommending that the Transamerica policy would have been a better policy for them based on the cost.
And that would have provided $500,000 coverage.
It would have provided $500,000 of coverage from death by any cause.
Okay. Now, isn't built into that advice some perhaps difference in strategy or philosophy about how to use life insurance and how that plays into one's retirement planning?
Well, the cheapest insurance policy rarely provides a good retirement plan. The policies that have additional features or cash value accumulation often add to your retirement planning, whereas the Transamerica policy that Mr. Santos referred to was truly a pure death benefit plan, and it might have had a terminal illness benefit as well.
Okay. But it would have been less money, but also ultimately a less good product.
Less money and less likely to, although let's say that the Transamerica policy for $500,000 cost about the same as the Americo policy. I mean, it costs a little bit more. So I think he was trying to say, my advice would have been, you should have bought more life insurance for that amount of money, and not buy the Americo policy or the American Amicable policy.
Okay. And when we talk about short-term and long-term thinking, with respect to the Mutual of Omaha policy that you were just asked about, and the ones that had lapsed, the confusion that arose from that apparently at Mutual of Omaha on their end about what was still in force. When one of those policies lapsed and the Brophies then reinstated coverage, they were actually given a new policy, right? They weren't able to reinstate that old policy that had lapsed.
Yes, they had a $250,000 accidental death benefit policy that had lapsed. And there was some question about reinstating that policy. And ultimately, it appeared to me that Ms. Brophy simply wrote a new contract, and that policy replaced the other one. And there's a notation in the file from the subpoena documents from the insurance company saying, make sure we terminate the other $250,000 policy simultaneous to issuing the new policy.
Okay. And when that happened, even though that period of lapse had not been very long, the premiums actually increased substantially, did they not?
And I believe now we're referring to the two $150,000 term policies issued in 2012-13. Yes, the first policy was issued at about $200 a month at age 57. Mr. Brophy had attained age 59 when Ms. Brophy sold him that policy, and the cost of that policy was around $250 a month. So the cost had gone up about 25% in those 2 years.
All right. All right. Would it be fair to characterize the plan that was in place in the Brophy household with respect to ensuring Dan Brophy's life as one that was not focused on short-term savings and short-term considerations, but was really taking a much longer-term perspective of what's going to be going on for us in 20 years?
Certainly the Forester's policy and the Americo policy were designed for long-term duration. The other policies, not so much. They were short-term in nature.
Okay. But you know that because they were paying higher premiums, they were willing to pay higher premiums to get that longer-term benefit.
That's correct. Those premiums provided a lengthy coverage period.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. May this witness be excused.
For us, yes.
For the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you can step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And we will be in recess until tomorrow.
We'll go off record and I'll vote. All rise.
I heard that one.
I know.